everyone, welcome to GRUFFtalk, where each week we explore everything to help us feel better, look better, live better, and age better. Today, we're talking with journalist Danielle Friedman, author of the new book, Let's Get Physical, How Women Discovered Exercise and Reshaped the World. It's a fascinating look at how women and their relationships with power and strength and self-image and femininity and exercise have all evolved over the years. I'm your host, Barbara Hannah Grufferman. For many women today, working out is as accepted as it is expected, fueling a multi-billion-dollar fitness industry. But it wasn't always like this. For much of the 20th century, sweating was considered unladylike, and girls grew up believing physical exertion would, wait for it, cause their uterus to literally fall out. And you gotta love this urban legend, running would turn you into a man. But in the 60s, that all changed. And thanks to a few fearless fitness pioneers, women really began to move. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I never once saw my mother work out or do any kind of physical activity other than walking from the house to the bus, from the bus to the house. And I think I was a chip off the old block and never really got involved in sports at school. And I prayed I wouldn't get picked for volleyball teams. I usually didn't, so that was all okay. But everything changed when I became a young working woman in New York City in the early 80s. I followed one fitness fad after another. You name it, I did it. The method created by dancer Lottie Burke, we'll be hearing more about her shortly. Bought myself the Thigh Master, wore that thong workout clothes thingy with Lycra. And then I went to the Vertical Club gym in New York City and so much more. But once marriage and kids were thrown into the mix with work and everything else that life has to offer, thanks to that excuse of no time for that, I was a bystander and no longer a participant. It wasn't until I hit 50 that I returned to getting physical with a vengeance when I took up running, something that women were tiptoeing into in the 60s, thanks to some really cool women like Catherine Switzer, who I've had the honor of meeting several times, of Boston Marathon fame. Now, while my own relationship with getting physical was evolving, so was the entire fitness industry, starting in the early 20th century. And this book takes a deep dive into the social norms that contributed to that evolution, and also shines a bright light on a few very exceptional women who helped move the exercise movement forward. So my guest today is Danielle Friedman, author of Let's Get Physical, How Women Discovered Exercise and Reshaped the World. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, New York Magazine's The Cut, which is actually where this all started. Great story there. Vogue, Glamour, Harper's Bazaar, The Washington Post, NBC News, In Style, The Daily Beast, Health, my goodness, and many other publications. This is her first book, and what a doozy of a book it is. Welcome to GRUFFtalk, Danielle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Before we start, I have two questions I love to ask all of my guests. First, where are you joining us from?
I am joining you from the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
My hometown and actually my home neighborhood. And second, okay, what did you eat for breakfast today?
Today I had, it was sort of a very picturesque breakfast. I had an avocado toast with egg.
Oh, that's perfect amount of protein. Sounds very healthy.
I'm normally not that glamorous with my breakfast. It's normally, a Chobani, but this morning I was treating myself.
No one's ever asked me yet, okay, Barbara, here's what I ate. Now, what did you eat today? Because it's the same thing. So, I'll tell you, it's a whole wheat toast with peanut butter.
Oh,
and
also very
chia
healthy.
Seeds. I do add chia seeds and sometimes blueberries, but that's it. I do not deviate. Okay, I need to say, Danielle, upfront and out loud that I love this book for so many reasons, but also because it caused me to have flashbacks to different decades of my own life, especially starting in the early 80s. As I mentioned before, when I was an independent working woman living in New York City, and I started going to Lotte Berk Studio, which became quite famous, also on the Upper East Side, to get my, as it was called, my seat whipped into shape. And I definitely want to talk more about Lottie Burke and the method that she created, because holy moly, what an eye-opener. But first, You started on this journey of discovery about the evolution of the women's exercise movement because you were getting married and you wanted to be in wedding shape. So what did you do and how did it all lead to researching and writing this book? Tell us the background story.
Yes. So I am a longtime runner, but I had never really done boutique fitness. And it was the incentive of getting married, wearing a strapless gown in a hotel ballroom in front of all of my friends and family that sort of lured me into the door of my local barre studio. It was a Pure Barre studio that I had passed by many times. And eventually I had heard great things, including from running friends who said that it had made them stronger and improved their running. And so I decided to check it out. Even though I was there for a pretty conventional reason, I still was wearing my sort of feminist journalist hat. I'm a health reporter, a feminist health reporter. And so
that means you also were a skeptic. Like, okay, is this going to work?
Skeptic
Let me
see. / cultural anthropologist, sort of very much aware of what was really an exclusively female space. There's no rules. It's not like there's no men allowed. But if you've ever been to a barre class, it tends to be overwhelmingly female.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just intrigued by the subculture. I also noticed that many of the moves were sort of surprisingly and sometimes almost comically sexual.
Yeah. I discovered that at the Lotte Berk Studio way back in the day.
It's a lot of pelvic tucks and tilts and thrusting. And I found it funny that, the class was approached with such seriousness and no one was kind of acknowledging what was, what in any other context would have been sort of, comically erotic. So I decided to do a little bit of research into where barre came from, how it had become a multi-billion-dollar phenomenon, and whether there was any, whether the sexual aspect was kind of was intentional, to improve women's sexual health or just kind of random. Well, one thing led to another, and I eventually stumbled on the story of Lottie Burke, the inventor of what became the barre workout, who I can talk a lot more about in a moment.
Yeah.
Lottie, though, was this incredibly colorful character, and she, sure enough, did in part create the workout to help women's sex lives and, help them basically.
Yeah, I mean, she came out and said it. I did not know that until I read your book.
Yeah.
But that was her goal because she was kind of an open, loving, free love kind of woman, right? Or?
Very much. Yeah. And and then I wrote about her story for The Cut. The story went viral. And it was actually even before the story went viral, while I was reporting it, that I very quickly just knew that there was a much bigger story here. I couldn't believe, as I was doing my reporting, that no one had written a book that basically told the story of the rise and, kind of cultural domination of women's fitness. At one point I thought, I would love to talk to the person who wrote the book. That'd be great context. And then I was like, wait a minute. So I set out to write the book that I wanted to read. And then when the piece went viral, it just, it kind of it proved to me that there was, in fact, an appetite for this story, and thankfully set me on the path to telling this much bigger story, which has been about a 4-year-long research project.
Oh, you did so much research. There's a lot of detail in there. And I remember reading the article because it had to do with, Lottie Burke and this. Yeah, I started having flashbacks reading the article and I learned so much more. And I remember somewhere in your book and possibly in the article too, you said something like the women who were the people who went to the studio had no idea about the background, about Lottie Burke and what she stood for. And in fact, they even thought Lydia Bach was Lottie Burke. And I'm guilty of that too. But that's a whole other story, everyone. You have to read the book to know what we're talking about. I mentioned, in the early 80s, going to the Lottie Burke method on the Upper East Side. And, at some point, who can remember exactly? But I moved on to the Feel the Burn, No Pain, No Gain program. by Jane Fonda. But tell us a little bit more about Lottie Burke, because you do talk about quite a few women, pioneers, as you call them, rightfully so, in your book. And I enjoyed reading about all of them. And I told you I had the pleasure of meeting Catherine Switzer a few times already in my life. But Lottie Burke was just the most fascinating person.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about her.
Yes. With Lottie, it's sort of like, how much time do we have?
Give us the highlights.
Yeah, no, I know. And there could be, with so many of the women I profile, there really could be books written about each of them. Mm-hmm. In some cases, there have been. Mm-hmm. But
true.
With Lottie, okay, so Lottie was a German Jewish dancer who really became sort of a celebrity in the modern ballet world in pre-World War II Germany. And she was a young woman basically when, Nazism started to take over, and she actually had to flee the country to avoid persecution. There's a very dramatic story in the book that I tell where she was always extremely bold and sort of unafraid to speak her mind, and
truly fearless.
After a performance where she had been forbidden to perform by the SS, she ran onto the stage and thanked the audience for not being Nazis, and then basically had to flee the country. And
it's like The Sound of Music. They do their last performance and then hit the road.
Then zoom off. Yeah. When Lottie was in London, she was part of this very bohemian scene. She was sort of like a dancer without a stage. And long story short, when she was in her 40s, which was in the late 1950s, she was like searching for something to do. And so she followed the old advice of do what you know, and she created this workout, which actually she called rehabilitative exercises. It didn't have the more sexy bar name.
In fact, that's not a sexy name at all.
No, not at all. And it combined her ballet training, which took place at a ballet bar, with yoga and what we would now call physical therapy. And she opened a small studio in a very chic part of London. And because of her artistic route, she was sort of part of this very A-list crowd of actors and writers. And so from the very beginning, her studio became this place to see and be seen. And it really became, a sensation. Lottie herself was very complicated. She was larger than life. She was in an open marriage. She talked about her affairs and her sex life while she taught. She also was a very, she wasn't the best mother.
I was just going to say, had a feeling you were heading there, and I was thinking, should we say uneven?
Yeah.
Like what's the best word?
Yeah.
She was a mixed bag, a mixed bag of a.
Yeah, very mixed bag. She, her daughter, Esther Fairfax, who I had the pleasure of meeting with for the book, is now 87 and continues to teach the method. But Lottie became this fixture of the swinging 60s in London.
Yeah. You talked about Mary Quant.
Yes.
And Mary Quant, right? Sassoon. I mean, it's great. It's like a wonderful, wonderful journey through a period of time that was really very meaningful, and again, I just found so many flashbacks that I was having while reading it. It was so incredible.
I have to say,
you should, right.
I was just going to say, actually, our shared neighborhood of the Upper East Side, which I talk about a little bit in the book, is really, I was surprised to find that it, there's a lot of women's fitness history located, within this
that
small
area,
including, like you said, the first US-based Lotte Berk Studio.
So are you still going to Barre or Pure Barre? Are you still doing that workout? I'm curious of how much of the Lottie Burke original, the method, as it was called, is used. Because I don't go, I'm a runner and I do strength training and all. I don't do Barre. And I'm really curious how much I hate to use the word stole, but how much have they incorporated into their own program? A lot?
It's a great question. And I do Barre kind of off and on. it's not, running is still my primary, you know, fitness love.
Yeah.
So
Mine
it's
too.
it's very interesting. And this was part of why I loved the history of Barre. So Lydia Bach, who you mentioned, I will give a little teaser as to who she is. She's the woman who brought Barre from Lotte Studio to the Upper East Side, to the US.
Mm-hmm.
Her studio then trained most of the people who went on to start the country's biggest bar franchises. Or if they didn't, if Lydia Bach and her staff didn't train them directly, there was like one degree. They're like the next generation. So they were trained by somebody who trained there. So it's kind of amazing how it all largely leads back to this one original studio. Because of that, there is actually quite a lot of continuity between the methods that are taught. Like, of course, everyone, wanted to put their own spin on it so that it wasn't just kind of like stealing it.
Sure.
And tried to evolve with the times. But when I met with Lottie Burke's daughter, Esther Fairfax, and this was the summer of 2019, pre-COVID, I had an opportunity.
Pre-COVID.
Yeah, I took a class with her in her home. She has like a home studio, and it was so interesting for me to see how it compared.
Yes.
The biggest difference was that the Esther's method, the original method, was much less focused on kind of the language of the gym and athleticism. It was much more sort of traditionally feminine and I guess feminized, felt more dance-based.
Yes.
And that's very,
correct.
From what I've heard, that's very intentional. It was more sensual. There was a section of class where we were literally instructed to do Kegels as well, I was like, you don't see that in Pure Barre, that's, so, I was the youngest person in the room by about 30 years. And it was very interesting. But,
there was a lot of that. I remember a lot of that going on. Yeah. And again, I was a very young woman, fresh out of graduate school, fresh to the, working. And I was like, this is eye-opening. Not kind of what I expected.
Yeah.
It was really interesting.
Yeah. So it has carried on, but it's also been very much modernized,
makes sense.
2021.
I find this book to be really quite a feminist book in so many ways. And especially because you explore really well the relationship between women and power and women and strength and sex and self-image and really so much more. And how do you feel the whole women's exercise movement evolved parallel to what was going on with the women's political movement during that time? Of course, I'm really thinking about post-war, right? Post-war and then 60s and on. How do you think that, how did those two work in parallel, in tandem?
Yeah, they very much were interconnected and, one helped to fuel the other. So my book begins in the 1950s, which is sort of when the modern fitness industry began to get off the ground. There was women's fitness before then, but it wasn't the kind of contemporary version that we recognize today. And it was also a period, of such strict gender norms and beliefs about women being the weaker sex and, women needing to basically perform weakness that was considered feminine. And so when you think about kind of how that might have impacted women's pursuit of fitness or strength, it just, like you said, you never saw your mother, work out. And there were just all of these implicit and explicit messages that women really shouldn't move very much once they reach.
And shouldn't be strong. I think that was a really big message.
Strong. Yeah.
Right.
And so obviously there were sort of parallel messages being sent across every part of women's experience at that time, social, political,
right,
professional. But what happened was, thanks to initially a few of these forward-thinking fitness pioneers, as well as the kind of shifting social temperature, was as after, Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique in 1963 and the women's movement started to take hold, women began to question whether they really were the weaker sex and to begin to defy that idea. And so if you look at, for example, the book Our Bodies, Ourselves, which was such a seminal.
I loved. I remember reading that. I must have been in college. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It came out, I think the first Simon & Schuster copy was 1971-ish. There's a section about...
I was in high school. I take that back.
Well,
I was in high school.
It took a while to... I think it just only grew throughout the decade. Yeah. But there's a section on women and exercise that I found so fascinating because, that book is so well known for the way that it encouraged women to take their health into their own hands and their reproductive health and to cultivate that kind of physical trust and autonomy. But the role
it normalized so much of our bodies in our own minds, which was so critical.
Yes.
So critical. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And, historically, the role of fitness in that pursuit has really kind of been, I think, overlooked and understudied. But there's a chapter right there of all of the ways in which building physical competence and strength could help women live happier, healthier lives, as well as achieve the social and political goals that the women's movement was striving for. So it was happening on that level. There were pioneers like Catherine Switzer and other figures in women's running who were literally having to fight, outdated sexist rules about who could
run, who could race, who could compete.
Yes. There was Title IX, which we're coming up on the 50th anniversary, which not only did it allow high school and college age women to have more opportunity and access to athletics, but then when those women graduated, they wanted to continue being active, so it created a generation of women who then often, kind of either became fitness instructors or helped to fuel the running boom.
Or coaches,
all sorts of, The opportunities for, active women or women who wanted to make fitness or athletics their careers before Title IX were so limited. I mean, it was basically PE teacher, And so there were all of these intersecting. It was kind of a perfect storm. There was also the fact that as more women were able to forge careers, they had more disposable income to then spend on fitness classes, spend on themselves. And I also, I found it to be, I was very intrigued by the stories of women who talked about how finding a sort of fitness practice or a fitness class they loved or taking up running allowed them for the first time to focus on themselves in a really healthy way. They had been kind of groomed to only care for really either the men in their lives or the children in their lives. And this was
both.
Not either or.
And then at some point, aging parents too. And not to mention community and friends and, and everything that a full good life offers. Right?
Exactly.
But it leaves very little time for yourself.
Correct. Yeah. So it was all of these ways, which again, haven't always been studied, combined to really help to make fitness, for many women be a tool for empowerment.
Right. After this short break, we'll hear about some of the fearless women who really helped move the women's fitness revolution forward. Okay, Danielle, you talk about some of the pioneers like Lottie Burke and Jane Fonda, who we love. Oh my God. I learned so much about Jane Fonda from your book. I was like, wow, is all I can say. And Catherine Switzer, of course, who we've already talked about, and Lottie Burke. Was there one of them, do you have a kind of a favorite? Was there one of them in particular whom you felt really, really pushed the women's fitness movement forward the most, and maybe even to date has had the most, the lasting impact on this?
So I would have to say Catherine Switzer. I don't want to pick favorites.
It's because you're a runner.
I mean, there is that. There is that.
But we do love her.
I love all of my babies.
Yes, I know.
All my children.
I don't want to say it's a Sophie's choice, but
yeah. And the other thing I'll say first is that I did really try to hone in on the women who had a lasting impact, because fitness, as we all know, is filled with a history of fads and, kind of flash in the pan movements. But I really wanted to look at the sort of movements, the fitness movements that help to lay the groundwork for how we move today and how we think about exercise and women's bodies. So that was helpful for me in sort of sifting through this massive history and really focusing it in.
Mm-hmm.
But among my pantheon of pioneers, Catherine is and was amazing. And for listeners who don't know her story, she was the first woman to run the Boston Marathon with a number. There was a woman named Bobby Gibb who ran it in 1966. But Catherine entered the race using her initials. It was a time when women were banned from the race. And she got a number. And as she was running, she was about 4 miles in, one of the race's directors got wind of the fact that there was a woman in his race and basically tackled her, tried to rip off her number. The photos of the incident went round the world.
Yeah. Just incredible. Yeah.
And Catherine she was a junior at Syracuse University at that time.
Mm-hmm.
She was a college student. And so the incident really galvanized her to make women's running a cause, a career, a mission. And so she was behind so many of the opportunities that then came along for women runners. She helped organize the first ever all-women's road race, which was then called the Crazy Legs Mini Marathon in New York City. It still exists today.
Oh, yes. I run it every year.
Mm-hmm.
Every year in Central Park. It's great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She was one of the activists who eventually helped to get women into the Boston Marathon in 1972. She also was one of the key activists behind creating an Olympic women's marathon, which amazingly didn't happen until 1984. So she was really fighting in a really direct way. And the other thing, too, is that I think women's running, almost I would say more than any of the other fitness movements I talk about in the book, is it's sort of the purest demonstration of women's physical potential. There's also weightlifting. So those are sort of comparing apples and oranges, but
yes,
running for many women is a very public activity. It's not really conventionally feminine. And, once Catherine was able to sort of turn the tide of social opinion about women's running, it helped to lift all of women's fitness and other outlets for women to move. So I think her impact really can't be overstated.
Yeah, she's really a hero, or a shiro, as we also say. What were a few of the biggest surprises that came out of your research for this book, for the article first and then for the book?
Yeah. Well, I was really struck by how recently women faced, so many of these social stigmas for wanting to be strong and physically active, and how recently they were denied opportunities. I think, a lot of young women today, especially, just they have grown up with fitness basically being ubiquitous. And the idea that there was a time when women couldn't sort of move in any way they wanted, for the most part, was really surprising. So the recency of this history never kind of ceased to amaze me. But also the fact that the sports bra wasn't invented until 1977. That very specific fact just
I saw that in the book.
Me.
Like, we don't think about, just like you said before, we don't really think about that.
Yeah.
The sports bra for us has just kind of always been there, at least since I've started running, at the age of 50. And my goodness, where would we be without that, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy that it was just started. And when you do think about all those other inventions that were created as a result of all this, like the lycra, with the spandex and all the different workout, the socks. What do you call those things that
leg
the
warmers?
Tights that the leg warmers? Thank you. Those, like all these things, really incredible. But the jog bra, really huge. Super important. Yep. So it was so great talking with you. I think everyone has heard I love this book. I thought it was fascinating in every way. And, cultural overview, a journey through the evolution. It just was really well done. And I have to say, I read a lot of the reviews too around, like in The Atlantic, which is my favorite magazine, by the way. That's my favorite
One of
publication.
Mine too. Yeah.
It just is. It's my go-to. And it was such a great review. And everywhere else, that in the New York Times, of course. I mean, you've really gotten some great press internationally as well. So it was just so great having you on to talk about all of this and allowing me to have my little flashbacks.
Thank you. I could talk about this with you for hours. This was so much fun.
We could go on. But, I always like to ask my guests to just give me 3 takeaways that you want everyone to leave this chat thinking about.
One is that women's fitness has always been and really continues to still be a privilege, not a right, even though there are so many more opportunities today. Researching this book really made me aware of the work that had to happen for me to have the opportunities that I do have, and the work that still needs to be done to create more access and opportunity for women. The second takeaway, and this is just something that I apply to my own life and I evangelize about, is that women's fitness, it's very complex, but I think a good rule of thumb is to move in ways that feel good and you can't lose. And that doesn't have to mean only moving in really easy or gentle ways. It can mean training for a marathon but hone in on how you actually feel when you're doing the movement and let that be your guide. And the third thing, which might be, I thought of you especially with this, but it's been very relevant to my own life as well, is that there's no age limit to fitness.
Right.
And several of the women I wrote about, including Lottie Burke, Jane Fonda, started their fitness careers in their 40s and then just took off from there. So I think that, in the past, there was this idea that you had to naturally stop moving basically as you aged. And the research suggests, and my research suggests, that couldn't be less true.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful takeaways, and especially all of them, but especially that last one. Thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you for tuning in, everyone, and learning more about our guest, Danielle Friedman, and her book, Let's Get Physical, How Women Discovered Exercise and Reshaped the World. You'll see all the links, so make sure you check out the book. Also, her many articles, including that one from The Cut. You can just Google it. And if you love this episode, please share it with all your friends and family. And if you don't want to miss an episode of GRUFFtalk ever, where we will be talking about money, sex, style, health, nutrition, grief, and so much more in upcoming episodes, here's what you need to do. Subscribe to GRUFFtalk wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. So easy. Just click on the subscribe button. Until next time, remember this. We can't control getting older, but we can control how we do it. Bye for now.